The coffee pot trembled in Maeve Sinclair's weathered hands as she watched 12 Navy SEALs file through the door of Rosie's diner at 5:47 hours. They moved with that particular silence she remembered, the kind that preceded lightning strikes in body bags. Her pulse quickened, muscle memory flooding back like spilled black coffee across white linoleum. These weren't tourists passing through Cedar Falls, Montana. SEALs didn't accidentally stumble into diners 90 miles from nowhere, especially not with that purposeful gait and those calculating eyes that swept every corner, every exit, every potential threat. The leader, a granite-faced man with lieutenant commander's bearing, approached the counter. His gaze lingered on her face longer than necessary, studying the thin scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline, a souvenir from Kandahar that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Coffee for 12, he said, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken recognition. "And whatever she recommends." Maeve's hand steadied. 17 months she'd been pouring coffee and serving apple pie to truckers and farmers, letting them see only what they expected. A 42-year-old woman worn down by life's disappointments. None of them knew about the distinguished flying cross buried in her bedroom closet, or the classified missions that still visited her dreams. None of them knew that Reaper 6 had once been the most feared call sign in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. "Eggs over easy, hash browns, wheat toast," she said without hesitation, recognizing the nutritional needs of operators preparing for something that required both energy and focus. "And the coffee's strong enough to wake the dead." A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, crossed the lieutenant commander's features. Behind him, his men had positioned themselves strategically throughout the diner's worn red booths. They weren't here for breakfast. They were here for her. The bell above the door chimed as Deputy Sheriff Ray Murphy stumbled in, uniform wrinkled from another late night at Mickey's bar. His bloodshot eyes took in the scene with the delayed processing of a man 3 drinks past professional. "Hell of a lot of military boys for a Tuesday morning," he slurred, unaware he was looking at enough firepower to level the town hall. Maeve set 12 white ceramic mugs on the counter, each placement precise as an aircraft carrier landing. Steam rose from the coffee like morning mist over a battlefield, and in that moment, she knew her carefully constructed civilian life was about to shatter like aircraft glass under enemy fire. The question wasn't whether they'd found her. It was what they needed badly enough to risk exposing an operator who'd officially died in a helicopter crash 18 months ago. The SEALs' breakfast order would be their last normal moment together. After this, everything would be classified, everything would be lethal, and everything would depend on whether the woman they called Reaper 6 still had the skills that had once made her legend among the special operations community. The war had followed her to Cedar Falls, Montana, and it was hungry for blood. The lieutenant commander's radio crackled softly. "Phoenix Actual, this is Vanguard 6, package located and confirmed, awaiting orders." The reply was immediate. "Vanguard 6, you are cleared for approach. Tell Reaper 6 her country needs her." Again. Maeve's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Phoenix Actual was the Pentagon's designation for operations so classified they didn't officially exist. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than anything she'd faced in Afghanistan, bigger than the missions that had earned her a reputation as the deadliest pilot in the sky. She looked at the dozen warriors seated in her diner, each one a volunteer for a mission that would likely kill most of them. Their eyes held the same mixture of determination and resignation she'd seen in her own mirror before Kandahar, before the crash that was supposed to have ended everything. But death had rejected Maeve Sinclair once before. Perhaps it was time to remind death why that had been a mistake. The coffee grew cold as she made a decision that would either save lives or end her own. "How long do I have to pack?" she asked, her voice steady as rotor blades cutting through morning air. The lieutenant commander's smile was sharp as a Kabar knife. 30 minutes, ma'am. The bird's already spinning up." Cedar Falls, Montana would have to find itself a new Waitress. The war needed its Reaper back. Deputy Sheriff Murphy sobered quickly when he realized the 12 men weren't actually eating their breakfast. They were watching the woman who'd served them coffee every morning for over a year, with the intensity of predators recognizing another apex hunter. The pieces clicked together in his alcohol-dulled mind. The way she always kept her back to the wall, how she could calculate tips without writing anything down, the fact that she'd never once asked him about his military service, despite the Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, understanding flooding through him like cold water. "You're military." Maeve wiped her hands on her apron, the gesture automatic after 17 months of civilian camouflage. "Was," she corrected, though they all knew better. Once a warrior, always a warrior. The uniform might change, but the warrior's heart never stopped beating to the rhythm of tactical necessity and controlled violence. The SEAL lieutenant commander stood, his men following in perfect synchronization. "Ma'am, I need you to know that this is voluntary. You've served your country beyond any reasonable expectation. No one would blame you for walking away." Her laugh was bitter as black coffee. "Walking away is what got us here in the first place." She untied her apron, the yellow fabric with its cheerful Rosie's Diner logo falling away like shed skin. Beneath it, her posture shifted subtly, shoulders squaring, stance widening to the helicopter pilot's ready position that had once been as natural as breathing. The transformation was remarkable. Deputy Murphy watched 42-year-old waitress Maeve Sinclair disappear, replaced by someone whose mere presence changed the air pressure in the room. This woman had never served coffee in her life. She'd served death from the sky, precise and implacable as winter. "What's the mission?" she asked, and now her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions at 200 feet and 150 knots. The lieutenant commander's expression grew grave. "Hostage rescue. 67 American contractors taken in Syria. The enemy has surface-to-air missiles, electronic warfare capabilities, and knows we're coming. They specifically requested that no rescue be attempted." Maeve's smile was cold as mountain air. "They know what that means, don't they?" "Yes, ma'am, it means they remember Kandahar, and they're scared." The radio crackled again. "All stations, this is Phoenix Actual. Operation Silent Thunder is authorized. Repeat, Silent Thunder is green for go." Silent Thunder, she remembered that designation. It was reserved for missions where failure meant not just death, but national disgrace. Where success required the kind of precision that turned legends into ghost stories. She looked at the SEALs one more time. These 12 volunteers who'd followed classified orders to a diner in Montana, because someone in Washington believed an officially dead pilot was their only chance of bringing 67 Americans home alive. They weren't here to drag her back to war. They were here because war had never really let her go. 30 minutes, she repeated, heading toward the door. "I'll be ready in 20. The morning sun painted Cedar Falls in shades of gold and amber as Maeve Sinclair walked toward her small apartment above the hardware store, each step taking her further from the life she'd built and closer to the woman she'd never stopped being. Behind her, 12 of America's deadliest warriors finished their coffee and prepared to follow her into whatever hell awaited in the Syrian desert. The war was calling Reaper 6 home. Maeve's apartment was spartanly furnished, a single bed, a kitchenette, and a closet that held more secrets than clothes. She pushed aside civilian disguises, flowered dresses, cardigans, sensible shoes that had never touched foreign soil. At the back, wrapped in plastic like a preserved corpse, hung her flight suit. The patches had been removed, but she could still see their ghostly outlines. 160th SOAR, the distinctive winged death's head that marked night stalkers, and the small American flag that had flown on 47 combat missions. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled the suit free. The fabric smelled like aviation fuel and old fear, scents that had once been home. On the small nightstand beside her bed, she retrieved a locked metal box. Inside, Her distinguished flying cross, her Purple Heart, and beneath those medals, a folded piece of paper that had traveled with her through every mission. Her daughter's last letter, written 3 days before the cancer finally won. "Fly safe, Mom. Come home to me." Emma's handwriting was shaky from chemotherapy, but the words still burned clear. Maeve had been in Syria when her 18-year-old daughter died, flying close air support for a SEAL team that needed extraction. She'd gotten the call 6 hours after landing, 6 hours too late to hold Emma's hand or tell her one last time that she was loved. That was why she'd crashed in Kandahar, not enemy fire or mechanical failure, but grief so profound it had made her forget, for one crucial moment, that altitude was life. The official report blamed hydraulic failure. The truth was simpler. Maeve Sinclair had wanted to die alongside her daughter, and the mountain had been kind enough to try accommodating her wish. But death had rejected her, and she'd spent 18 months in Cedar Falls learning to live with survivors' guilt heavy as armor plating. Now they wanted her to fly again, to risk other mothers' children because she was the only pilot alive with the specific combination of skills this mission required. She pulled on the flight suit, muscle memory guiding each zip and buckle. In the mirror, the Waitress vanished completely. Reaper 6 looked back at her, older, scarred, but still carrying herself with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned to navigate through three-dimensional combat while under fire. Her reflection held questions. Was she still fast enough? Still accurate enough? Still willing to kill to save lives? The sound of rotor blades answered before she could. Through her window, she watched a Black Hawk settle onto the high school football field with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. No markings, no identification, just the matte black finish that meant we were never here. The sight sent electricity through her nervous system, awakening reflexes that 17 months of coffee service hadn't quite killed. Her secure phone, the one she'd kept charged despite swearing she'd never use it again, buzzed with an encrypted message. "Reaper 6, this is Phoenix Actual. Hostage location confirmed. Enemy strength estimated at 200 combatants with advanced air defense systems. Mission requires precision insertion at maximum range under electronic jamming conditions. Duration approximately 14 hours. Casualty estimates are significant." She typed back, "Phoenix Actual, this is Reaper 6, copy all. One question, are we bringing them home or are we bringing them home?" The reply was immediate. "Reaper 6, we're bringing them home, all of them, no exceptions." Maeve smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced in 18 months. Purpose. Not the manufactured meaning she'd tried to find in serving coffee and small-town conversation, but the clean, sharp purpose of a warrior with a mission worth dying for. She grabbed her personal effects, Emma's letter, a photograph of her daughter's graduation, and the small silver cross that had been her own mother's, and walked toward the door. The woman who'd lived in this apartment was staying behind. Reaper 6 was going back to war. The Black Hawk's engine screamed against the Montana morning as Maeve approached, her flight suit drawing stares from early-rising townspeople who'd never suspected their quiet waitress was anything more than she appeared. The SEALs were already aboard, weapons secured, faces painted with the grim determination of men who understood the odds and accepted them anyway. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison. She'd finally gotten his name from his radio chatter, extended a hand to help her into the aircraft. His grip was firm, professional, but she caught something else in his eyes. Hope. These men were betting their lives on a pilot who'd officially died 18 months ago, trusting that skill and experience could overcome time and grief. "Briefing package is in your headset," Morrison shouted over the rotor noise. "Flight time to staging area is 4 hours. Mission brief starts the moment we're airborne." Maeve settled into the jump seat, muscle memory guiding her hands to the safety harness even as her eyes cataloged the aircraft's modifications. Additional fuel tanks, enhanced communication arrays, and weapon systems that definitely weren't standard Navy issue. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a declaration of war against whoever had been stupid enough to take American hostages. As the Black Hawk lifted off, Cedar Falls, Montana fell away beneath them like a discarded dream. The last thing Maeve saw was Rosie's diner, where her coffee pot was probably still warm and her apron still lay folded on the counter. Someone else would have to serve the morning regulars. Someone else would have to pretend that Tuesday was just another day. The mountain peaks of Montana gave way to endless prairie, then desert, then the staging areas where America's most lethal operators prepared for missions the public would never hear about. With each mile, Maeve felt herself transforming back into the woman who'd earned her reputation flying into places where angels feared to tread. The war had found her in Cedar Falls, Montana, but war had always known where to look. It had simply been patient, waiting for the right mission, one that required not just any pilot, but the one pilot who'd proven she could thread the needle between life and death while carrying precious cargo through hell itself. Reaper 6 was coming home. The briefing documents painted a picture grim as a mortician's smile. 67 American contractors captured during a humanitarian mission in northern Syria, held in a compound that intelligence described as a fortress built by paranoid minds with unlimited resources. Satellite imagery showed concrete bunkers, underground tunnels, and enough anti-aircraft weaponry to down anything larger than a sparrow. The hostages were being held in 3 separate buildings, because their captors understood that concentrated targets invited precision strikes. Maeve studied the terrain maps with the focus of a surgeon examining X-rays. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, natural barriers that would funnel any approach into predetermined kill zones. Worse, electronic intelligence indicated sophisticated radar and communication jamming equipment. They wouldn't just be flying blind, they'd be flying deaf and mute as well. Enemy commander is Ibrahim al-Qasim, Morrison continued, his voice crackling through her headset. Former Syrian army colonel, trained by Russian Spetsnaz. He specifically requested that the United States not attempt a rescue, claiming it would result in the execution of all hostages. Maeve's laugh was sharp as shattered glass. He's scared. Ma'am. Al-Qasim knows what happened at Kandahar. He knows what Reaper 6 did to his predecessor. The memory came back unbidden. Another valley, another fortress, another group of captured Americans. She'd gone in alone that time, too, flying a modified little bird through terrain that shouldn't have supported rotary wing aircraft. By dawn, 43 hostages had come home, and the enemy compound had been reduced to smoking craters. Al-Qasim had been Al-Hassan's communications officer. He'd watched from a neighboring ridge as Reaper 6 turned his mentor's impregnable fortress into a graveyard. No wonder he was scared. He knew exactly what she was capable of when American lives were on the line. The staging area appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of temporary buildings and hidden aircraft in the middle of Jordan's eastern desert. As they descended, Maeve could see the tools of her trade waiting under camouflaged tarps, helicopters modified for missions that didn't officially exist, flown by pilots whose names appeared on no roster. But the aircraft that drew her attention sat apart from the others, sleek and predatory as a hunting falcon. The MH-6M Little Bird had been modified beyond manufacturer specifications. Enhanced engines, additional fuel capacity, electronic warfare systems that could blind enemy radar, and weapon systems that turned the small helicopter into a flying arsenal. Someone had painted a small Grim Reaper on the nose, barely visible unless you knew where to look. "She's been waiting for you," Morrison said, following her gaze. "Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez has been maintaining her personally, says she's never run better." Maeve felt something loosen in her chest, a tightness she'd carried for 18 months without realizing it. The little bird was home in a way that Cedar Falls had never been. This was where she belonged, strapped into a cockpit with American lives depending on her skill and a mission that would either end in glory or death. Chief Warrant Officer Carlos Rodriguez emerged from beneath the aircraft, wiping grease from his hands with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood that mechanical perfection was the difference between mission success and flag-draped coffins. His weathered face split into a grin when he saw her approaching. "Reaper 6, he said, snapping a salute that carried genuine respect. "She's ready for you, ma'am. Engines are fresh, electronics are upgraded, and I've tuned her to purr like a cat, just like old times." Old times. When flying into hell was just another Tuesday, when bringing Americans home was worth any risk, when Maeve Sinclair had been young enough to believe she was immortal and skilled enough to make that belief seem reasonable. She ran her hand along the little bird's fuselage, feeling the familiar vibration of a machine built for violence and precision. Every rivet, every panel, every modification was designed with one purpose: getting in fast, hitting hard, and getting out before the enemy could respond. It was death from above, delivered with surgical precision and absolute lethality. "How long until mission launch?" she asked, already knowing the answer from the briefing documents but needing to hear it confirmed. 18 hours, ma'am," Morrison replied. "Enough time for equipment checks, final briefings, and—" He paused, understanding the weight of what he was asking. "And enough time to write letters I hope nobody ever has to read," Maeve finished. It was a tradition among pilots. Before any mission that might be your last, you wrote goodbye to the people who mattered. She'd written those letters 47 times before. Tonight would be 48. The sun was setting over the Jordanian desert, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded her of blood and fire. Somewhere in Syria, 67 Americans were counting hours and praying for a rescue they probably didn't believe would come. They didn't know that their prayers had been answered by a waitress from Montana who'd once made the impossible look routine. But Al-Qasim knew. He was probably watching the skis already, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, Reaper 6 was preparing to visit him one last time. The maintenance tent glowed with harsh fluorescent light as Maeve conducted her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of a priest performing sacred rituals. Every bolt, every wire, every fluid level was checked twice, not because she didn't trust Rodriguez's work, but because in her world mechanical failure meant death for everyone counting on her skills. The little bird submitted to her examination, with the patience of a war horse being saddled by its rider. Rodriguez worked beside her in comfortable silence, occasionally handing her tools or pointing out modifications she hadn't seen before. The electronic warfare suite was completely new, gear that could spoof enemy radar into seeing ghost contacts while rendering her own aircraft invisible to conventional detection. The weapon systems had been upgraded too. Precision-guided rockets that could thread windows and Hellfire missiles with target-seeking capabilities that bordered on supernatural. "She'll fly different than you remember," Rodriguez warned, watching her trace power cables with fingers that remembered every aircraft she'd ever flown. "The new electronics add weight, but the engine upgrades more than compensate. She's faster, quieter, and deadlier than anything you've flown before." Maeve nodded, absorbing the information. Aircraft were like lovers. Each one had its own personality, its own quirks and preferences. You had to court them, understand them, become one with them before they'd perform when your life depended on perfection. This little bird was familiar but evolved, like meeting a childhood friend after years apart. The mission brief had been updated twice since her arrival. Intelligence now indicated that Al-Qasim had moved some of the hostages to a secondary location, a deliberate dispersal designed to complicate any rescue attempt. Instead of 3 buildings, she'd now have to hit 5 separate targets across a valley that would be crawling with armed guards and automated defenses. Morrison appeared at her shoulder, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. "Thought you might need this, ma'am. It's going to be a long night." She accepted the coffee gratefully, recognizing the gesture for what it was, a small comfort before the storm. "How are the SEALs holding up?" They're ready. Been studying the target layouts for 6 hours straight. They know every room, every corridor, every potential exit strategy. He paused, studying her face in the harsh light. Ma'am, I have to ask, are you sure about this? The mission parameters have changed significantly since we found you. This isn't just dangerous anymore, it's borderline suicidal. Maeve sipped her coffee, tasting the bitterness that reminded her of too many pre-mission briefings in too many forward operating bases. Lieutenant Commander, let me tell you something about impossible missions. They're only impossible until someone does them. Then they become Tuesday. Yes, ma'am, it's just, he struggled with words, finally settling on honesty. We lost pilots in Syria last month. Good pilots flying similar missions. The enemy has learned from Kandahar. They know how to fight helicopters now. She set down her coffee cup and looked him directly in the eye. They know how to fight helicopters. They don't know how to fight me. It wasn't arrogance. It was simple statement of fact. Maeve Sinclair had spent 15 years learning to do things in aircraft that physics said were impossible. She'd flown through sandstorms that grounded every other pilot, threaded needles through mountain passes that existed only on classified maps, and delivered American warriors to places where the enemy thought they were safe from retribution. Al-Qasim had studied Kandahar, but he'd studied the aftermath, the smoking ruins and body counts. He hadn't studied the 18 minutes of flying that preceded the destruction, when Reaper 6 had become something more than human, something that merged completely with her aircraft to become an instrument of perfectly controlled violence. Equipment check complete, she announced, running through her final inspections. Electronics tested and calibrated, weapons systems armed and verified, navigation programmed for multiple target approach vectors. Rodriguez handed her a helmet that had been modified with night vision systems and heads-up display capabilities that would overlay tactical information directly onto her field of view. It was heavier than she remembered, but the additional equipment would give her capabilities that previous generations of pilots could only dream of. Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly, I want you to know it's an honor working with you again. What you did in Afghanistan, you saved my nephew's life. He was one of the rangers you extracted from that valley near Mazar-i-Sharif. The memory came back. A desperate call for emergency extraction, rangers pinned down by superior forces, a landing zone that existed only in the minds of optimistic cartographers. She'd gone in anyway, because leaving Americans behind wasn't an option. She'd never learned the names of the men she'd pulled out that day, just another mission in a war full of missions. What's his name? She asked. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, 2nd Battalion. He's married now, has a daughter. Says he's going to name her Maeve if it's okay with you. Something tight in her chest loosened slightly. This was why she flew, not for medals or recognition, but for the chance that somewhere, a man named Miguel Rodriguez would hold his daughter and remember that someone once cared enough to risk everything for strangers in uniform. Tell him it would be an honor, she said, then turned back to her aircraft. The little bird waited patiently, engines cool but ready, systems armed but dormant. In a few hours, they would dance together through Syrian airspace, threading the needle between life and death while carrying the hopes of 67 Americans who had no idea their salvation wore the face of a small-town waitress. The mission countdown had begun. The pre-mission briefing took place in a windowless trailer that smelled of coffee, fear, and the particular type of tension that preceded operations where casualties were expected. 12 SEALs, 4 pilots, 2 intelligence officers, and 1 officially dead waitress gathered around a table covered with satellite photographs, terrain maps, and tactical overlays that painted the target area in shades of red and black, the colors of blood and night. Colonel Sarah Webb, the mission commander, stood at the head of the table with the bearing of someone who'd sent good people into bad places too many times to count. Her voice was steady, professional, and utterly devoid of false optimism. Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Silent Thunder launches in 4 hours. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this will be easy. The satellite imagery was brutally clear. Al-Qasim's compound sprawled across 3 square miles of Syrian valley, protected by natural chokepoints and enough firepower to stop a conventional assault. But this wouldn't be a conventional assault. This would be surgical, precise, and over before the enemy could mount an effective response. Primary objective: recovery of 67 American hostages, all contractors working on humanitarian infrastructure projects. Secondary objective: elimination of high-value target Ibrahim al-Qasim and his command structure. Tertiary objective: destruction of enemy communications and weapons caches to prevent future operations. Maeve studied the approach routes, her mind automatically calculating flight times, fuel consumption, and the complex three-dimensional chess game of moving through defended airspace. The valley's geography would force her to fly low, beneath radar coverage but within range of shoulder-fired missiles. Every second would be a balance between speed and stealth, between getting there fast and getting there alive. Intelligence indicates enemy strength at approximately 200 combatants, Webb continued, with access to advanced surface-to-air missile systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and Russian-supplied communications equipment. They know we're coming. The question is whether they know when and how. Lieutenant Commander Morrison leaned forward, studying infrared reconnaissance photos. "Ma'am, these thermal signatures suggest underground facilities we haven't mapped, if they move the hostages below ground." "Then we go underground," Maeve interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced similar challenges before. "The mission parameters don't change. We adapt and overcome." Webb's smile was sharp as a blade. "Which brings us to our primary asset, Chief Warrant Officer Maeve Sinclair, call sign Reaper 6. The room fell silent. Even among special operations personnel, certain names carried weight that transcended rank and protocol. Reaper 6 was legend, whispered stories of impossible rescues and enemy compounds reduced to ash. For those who haven't been briefed, Chief Sinclair was officially killed in action 18 months ago during a classified operation in Afghanistan. For the purposes of this mission, she remains officially dead. Her participation in Operation Silent Thunder never happened. Understood. A chorus of "yes, ma'am" filled the trailer. Maeve felt the familiar weight of classification settle over her like armor plating. She'd been erased from official records, transformed from person to asset, from individual to instrument of national policy. It was a price she'd paid gladly, though she sometimes wondered if the woman who'd raised Emma Sinclair still existed somewhere beneath the warrior's shell. The tactical briefing continued for another hour. Insertion routes, communication protocols, contingency plans for when everything went wrong. The SEALs would insert via faststroke from Maeve's little bird at multiple points around the compound, then work systematically through each building while she provided overwatch and emergency extraction. "Rules of engagement are weapons-free," Webb announced. "Anyone carrying a weapon in the target area is considered hostile. Priority is hostage safety, but you are authorized to use whatever force necessary to complete the mission." The intelligence officer, a thin man whose eyes held the haunted look of someone who knew too much, spread additional photographs across the table. "Most recent intelligence suggests the hostages are being held in these 5 buildings. However, Al-Qasim has been moving them regularly to prevent exactly this type of operation. Be prepared for empty buildings or deliberate misdirection." Maeve memorized each structure, noting entry points, potential hazards, and the complex geometry of buildings designed by someone who understood how special operations forces worked. Al-Qasim wasn't just scared, he was smart, and that made him dangerous in ways that mere numbers couldn't quantify. "Weather forecast shows clear skies with 10-knot winds from the northwest," the intelligence officer continued. "Moon phase is new, which gives us maximum darkness but also eliminates natural illumination. You'll be flying on instruments and night vision exclusively. Perfect conditions for death from above. Maeve had always preferred the new moon. It turned her aircraft into a ghost, invisible until the moment she struck with precision that seemed supernatural to those who witnessed it. The darkness would be her ally, concealing her approach until it was too late for the enemy to respond effectively. Final equipment check in 2 hours, Webb announced. Mission launch at 200 hours. Gentlemen and lady, bring our people home. The trailer emptied slowly, operators heading to make final preparations, write letters to loved ones, and perform the small rituals that helped warriors face the possibility that tonight might be their last night alive. Maeve remained seated, studying the photographs with the intensity of a chess master contemplating a final move. Al-Qasim thought he understood her. He'd studied Kandahar, analyzed her tactics, prepared defenses designed specifically to counter her capabilities. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd prepared to fight the Reaper 6 of 18 months ago, not the woman who'd spent that time learning to live with loss so profound it had nearly destroyed her. Tonight, 67 Americans would discover that their prayers had been answered by someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. Al-Qasim would learn that the most dangerous enemy is one with nothing left to lose. The Syrian desert stretched endlessly beneath them, a moonscape of rocks and shadows broken only by the occasional cluster of lights that marked villages too small for maps. Maeve flew the little bird at 50 feet above ground level, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection, while her night vision systems painted the landscape in shades of green and silver. The aircraft hummed beneath her with the contentment of a machine operating at peak efficiency. 4 hours into the flight, they'd crossed 2 national borders without appearing on any official flight plan. The little bird's electronic warfare suite spoofed radar signatures, making them appear to be a flock of migrating birds to any system sophisticated enough to detect them at all. Behind her, 12 SEALs sat in perfect silence, each man lost in the particular meditation that preceded combat. Phoenix Actual, this is Reaper 6, she transmitted over encrypted channels. Approaching initial waypoint, all systems green, no enemy contact. Copy Reaper 6. Latest intelligence shows increased activity at the target site. Thermal imaging suggests guards have been reinforced. Be advised, this may be a setup. Maeve's smile was cold as winter moonlight. Al-Qasim was scared enough to show his hand early, bunching his forces in defensive positions that would make them excellent targets for precision strikes. Fear made people predictable, and predictable enemies were dead enemies. Understood. Phoenix Actual, proceeding to target area. The compound appeared on her heads-up display as a collection of geometric shapes outlined in red. Buildings, walls, guard towers, and weapon emplacements arranged with the precision of someone who'd studied American tactics and prepared accordingly. Thermal imaging showed approximately 300 heat signatures moving through the facility, far more than intelligence had predicted. All stations, this is Reaper 6. Target assessment shows enemy strength significantly higher than briefed. Recommend we proceed with insertion as planned. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. Ma'am, that's triple the expected opposition. We should call for additional support. Negative, Vanguard 6. Additional assets would compromise stealth and give the enemy time to execute the hostages. We proceed as briefed. The first guard tower came into view, a concrete structure bristling with communications equipment and heavy weapons. 2 guards stood silhouetted against the harsh glare of floodlights, their weapons trained on approach routes that tactical planners had calculated would be the most likely avenues of attack. They were looking in the wrong direction. Maeve triggered her weapon systems with the casual precision of someone activating a coffee machine. A single Hellfire missile streaked through the darkness, its infrared seeker head locking onto the guard tower's heat signature with mechanical inevitability. The explosion was brief but thorough. Concrete, steel, and human beings reduced to scattered debris in the span of a heartbeat. The second guard tower died 3 seconds later, before its occupants could process what had happened to their colleagues. Maeve flew through the debris field without slowing, her aircraft's armored hull deflecting fragments that would have disabled lesser helicopters. Reaper 6 to all stations, defensive positions are suppressed, beginning primary insertion. The compound erupted into chaos as emergency alarms wailed and guards ran toward defensive positions that no longer existed. Muzzle flashes sparkled in the darkness as small arms fire reached desperately toward an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't fight with conventional weapons. Maeve dropped the little bird into the compound's central courtyard with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, her landing lights cutting through smoke and dust as 12 SEALs fast-roped into hell itself. Each man hit the ground running, disappearing into the maze of buildings and corridors where 67 Americans waited for salvation. "Vanguard team is on the ground," Morrison reported, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "Beginning systematic clearance of primary structures." Maeve lifted off immediately, transitioning into overwatch mode as her aircraft circled the compound like a predatory bird seeking targets. Below, the SEALs moved through the facility with ruthless efficiency, their thermal signatures visible on her displays as they flowed through buildings like water through a maze. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Heavy machine gun fire reached up from concealed positions, tracer rounds drawing lethal lines through the darkness. Surface-to-air missiles launched from hidden batteries, their exhaust trails lighting the night like deadly fireworks. But Maeve had danced this dance before. The little bird responded to her commands like an extension of her own body, sliding sideways through missile contrails and diving beneath machine gun tracers with movements that defied physics and common sense. Her return fire was precise and devastating, rockets that found their targets with supernatural accuracy, eliminating threats before they could endanger the operators on the ground. Vanguard 1 to Reaper 6, Building Alpha is clear. 12 hostages recovered, all alive. Morrison's voice carried the tension of someone fighting room to room through a facility designed to kill intruders. Copy, Vanguard 1. Moving to provide close air support for Building Beta. The second structure was larger, more heavily defended, and crawling with enemy combatants who'd had time to prepare defensive positions. Maeve approached from an unexpected angle, using a destroyed guard tower as cover before emerging directly above the building's roof. Her chain gun spoke in mechanical rhythm, precision fire that cleared defensive positions without endangering the hostages she knew were somewhere inside. Building Beta secure, came the report. 18 more hostages recovered, some injuries but all ambulatory. 3 buildings down, 2 to go. But Maeve could see the pattern developing on her tactical display. The enemy was falling back toward the final 2 structures, concentrating their remaining forces in a defensive position that would make the final assault a killing ground for anyone who approached. All stations, this is Reaper 6. Enemy is consolidating at buildings Delta and Echo. Expect heavy resistance. That was when Al-Qasim made his mistake. Perhaps desperation drove him, or perhaps he simply couldn't resist the opportunity to face the legend that had haunted his nightmares for 18 months. His voice crackled across multiple radio frequencies, broadcasting in clear English so there would be no misunderstanding. Reaper 6, this is Colonel Ibrahim Al-Qasim. I have 37 American hostages in this building. Approach and they die. Land and surrender and I will allow them to live. Maeve's laughter was sharp as breaking glass. Al-Qasim, this is Reaper 6. I have a better idea. She pulled the little bird into a climbing turn that should have been impossible at such low altitude, using momentum and physics to gain height while staying below radar coverage. At the apex of her climb, She rolled inverted and dove toward the building where Al-Qasim waited with his hostages and his dreams of revenge. The maneuver was called a death blossom, a near-vertical attack run that presented the smallest possible target profile while delivering maximum firepower at point-blank range. It was also nearly suicidal, requiring perfect timing and aircraft control that bordered on supernatural. Maeve had invented the technique during her third tour in Afghanistan. Tonight, she would perfect it. Her rockets struck with precision that seemed impossible, shaped charges that punched through walls and floors to create entry points exactly where the SEALs needed them, while avoiding any space where hostages might be held. The building's defensive positions simply evaporated under her assault, concrete and steel reduced to rubble in seconds. Vanguard teams, Building Delta is prepped. You are clear for final assault. The SEALs flowed into the structure like water finding its level, moving through corridors that Maeve had carved for them with surgical precision. Behind them, she orbited in her little bird, watching thermal signatures separate into the clean geometry of tactical movement. Her warriors were ghosts in the night, invisible until the moment they struck with lethal purpose. Contact, contact. Hostiles in the main corridor. Machine gun fire echoed through her radio as the SEALs encountered Al-Qasim's final defensive line. She could see it on her thermal imaging. A dozen enemy fighters positioned behind makeshift barricades, with the hostages somewhere beyond in rooms she couldn't identify without risking civilian casualties. Reaper 6 to Vanguard 1, I'm going to thread the needle. Mark your positions and stay low. What happened next would be analyzed in classified debriefings for years to come. Maeve dropped the little bird through the building's central courtyard, a space barely wider than her rotor diameter, and fired through windows that shouldn't have been large enough for her weapons to traverse. Each shot was calculated to neutralize threats while avoiding any possibility of harming the Americans she'd come to save. The enemy barricades dissolved under her assault, reduced to smoking debris and silence. In the sudden quiet that followed, she could hear Morrison's voice reporting what she already knew. Building Delta secure. 22 hostages recovered, all alive. One building left. 37 Americans still in enemy hands. And somewhere in that final structure, Ibrahim Al-Qasim waited with the patience of someone who understood that legends could die just like anyone else. The final building loomed before them like a concrete monument to futility. 3 stories of reinforced walls and narrow windows, designed by someone who'd studied every American rescue operation of the past 20 years. Al-Qasim had learned from Kandahar, analyzed every tactical decision, and built himself a fortress specifically designed to kill Reaper 6 and anyone foolish enough to follow her into hell. Maeve circled the structure at maximum weapon range, her sensors probing for weaknesses while her mind calculated angles of attack and probable defensive responses. Thermal imaging showed approximately 40 enemy combatants positioned throughout the building, with the 37 remaining hostages concentrated in what appeared to be a central room on the second floor. Phoenix Actual, this is Reaper 6. Final target shows complex defensive positions with hostages in close proximity to enemy forces, requesting permission to engage with extreme prejudice. Reaper 6, Phoenix Actual. You are authorized to use any means necessary to recover American personnel. Collateral damage is acceptable if it serves mission objectives. The words carried weight that went beyond military authorization. Somewhere in Washington, someone with stars on their shoulders and blood on their hands had made the calculation that 37 American lives were worth any price, including the destruction of everything Al-Qasim had built in this Syrian valley. Copy Phoenix Actual, beginning final assault. She'd been saving her best weapons for this moment. Precision-guided munitions that could thread needles and find targets through walls that conventional explosives couldn't penetrate. The little bird carried 2 AGM-176 Griffin missiles, each one capable of striking specific rooms while leaving adjacent spaces untouched. But first, she needed to know exactly where the hostages were being held. Vanguard 1, this is Reaper 6. I need eyes on the interior layout. Can you provide reconnaissance before final assault? Morrison's response came through static and gunfire. Negative, Reaper 6. Building is too heavily defended for personnel reconnaissance. We'll have to go in blind. Blind. The word that every pilot feared, the condition that turned precision operations into desperate gambles. But Maeve had flown blind before, through sandstorms in Iraq, through mountain passes in Afghanistan where GPS signals died and navigation became pure instinct. She'd learned to see with more than her eyes, to feel her way through three-dimensional space using senses that civilians didn't know existed. All stations, this is Reaper 6. I'm going in for close reconnaissance. Maintain overwatch positions and be ready for immediate assault following my signal. She dropped the little bird to street level and began a low-speed orbit of the building, using her aircraft's advanced sensor suite to map the interior through walls and floors. Thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and electronic signatures painted a picture of the structure's layout, room by room, corridor by corridor, until she could see the building as clearly as if its walls were transparent. The hostages were there, clustered in a central room that had probably been a conference area before Al-Qasim transformed it into a prison. They were surrounded by guards, but the thermal signatures suggested the Americans were separated from their captors by enough space to allow surgical strikes. Al-Qasim's voice crackled across the radio frequencies again. Reaper 6, I know you can hear me. I know you're analyzing my defenses, calculating angles of attack, planning the destruction you brought to Kandahar. But this is not Kandahar. These hostages will die if you attempt to repeat your previous tactics. Maeve's response was calm as morning coffee. Al-Qasim, you're right. This isn't Kandahar. It's going to be much worse. She pulled the little bird into a climb that carried her beyond the range of shoulder-fired missiles, then rolled into an attack run that would have been suicidal for any pilot without her particular combination of skill and calculated desperation. The Griffin missiles launched in sequence, their guidance systems locked onto specific rooms where thermal imaging showed enemy concentrations. The first missile punched through the building's eastern wall and detonated in a corridor where 12 enemy fighters had positioned themselves to repel boarders. The explosion was contained, surgical, leaving adjacent rooms intact while eliminating threats with mechanical precision. The second missile found Al-Qasim's command post on the third floor, where radio equipment and tactical maps were reduced to smoking debris along with the men who'd operated them. The building's defensive coordination died with that strike, leaving individual fighters isolated and unable to coordinate their response. Vanguard teams, defensive positions are neutralized. You are clear for final assault. The SEALs moved like shadows given substance, flowing through breaches that Maeve had carved for them with weapons that turned concrete walls into doorways. Behind them, she orbited in her little bird, watching thermal signatures separate into the clean patterns of tactical movement as her warriors closed on their objective. Contact, heavy resistance on floor 2. Machine gun fire echoed through the night as Al-Qasim's remaining fighters made their final stand. But these weren't the disciplined soldiers who'd held Kandahar. These were desperate men who'd watched their defenses crumble under assault by forces they couldn't see, couldn't fight, and couldn't escape. Reaper 6 to Vanguard 1, I'm coming in to finish this. What she did next would be classified at levels that erased it from official history. Maeve flew the little bird directly through the building's central courtyard, a space that shouldn't have accommodated rotary wing aircraft, and engaged targets through windows with precision that seemed supernatural to anyone watching. Her chain gun spoke in measured bursts, each one eliminating threats without endangering the hostages she'd sworn to protect. When the firing stopped, silence fell over the compound like snow, broken only by Morrison's voice reporting what everyone already knew. All buildings secure, all hostages recovered, mission complete. 37 Americans walked out of that building alive, blinking in the harsh glare of extraction lights as helicopters landed to carry them home. They would never know the name of the woman who'd saved them, never understand the skills that had made their rescue possible, never realize that their salvation had worn the face of a small-town waitress from Montana. Ibrahim al-Qasim was found in the ruins of his command post, killed by the same surgical precision that had characterized every aspect of the operation. His fortress was reduced to smoking rubble, his fighters were dead or scattered, and his dreams of revenge had died with him in the Syrian desert. As dawn broke over the compound, Maeve sat in her little bird and watched the extraction helicopters disappear into the morning sky, carrying 67 Americans towards safety and the families who'd prayed for their return. The mission was complete, the hostages were safe, and Reaper 6 had proven once again that some legends were too dangerous to stay buried. But even as she savored the mission's success, she knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere in the shadows of the intelligence community, someone was already planning the next impossible rescue, the next mission that would require skills possessed by only one pilot in the world. The war would always need its Reaper. The extraction flight back to Jordan passed in contemplative silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of rotor blades and encrypted radio chatter from command centers that officially didn't exist. Maeve flew through Syrian airspace with the casual confidence of someone who just reminded an entire region why certain legends were better left undisturbed. Behind her, the compound burned like a funeral pyre for dreams of American weakness. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. Reaper 6, Phoenix actual reports all hostages are in stable condition. Medical teams are standing by at the extraction point. You did it, ma'am. You brought them all home. All of them. 67 Americans who would see their families again because a waitress from Cedar Falls, Montana had remembered how to be a weapon. The mathematics of war were simple. Her skills multiplied by their need equaled salvation for people who'd never know her name. The staging area appeared on the horizon like a mirage of civilization in the vast emptiness of the Jordanian desert. Maeve could see helicopters clustered around medical tents, where flight surgeons were checking hostages for injuries that went deeper than physical trauma. Some wounds took years to heal, if they healed at all. She knew that better than most. As she settled the little bird onto the landing pad, Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez emerged from the maintenance hangar with a grin that could have powered the entire facility. Reaper 6, how'd she handle? Like a dream, Chief. Your modifications made the difference. The aircraft had performed flawlessly, responding to her commands with the precision of a fine instrument. Rodriguez had tuned her to perfection, creating a machine that transcended engineering to become something approaching art. The debriefing took place in the same windowless trailer where they'd planned the operation, but now the atmosphere was different, charged with the particular satisfaction that came from impossible missions accomplished against overwhelming odds. Colonel Webb reviewed tactical footage with the intensity of someone studying religious texts, analyzing every decision and maneuver for lessons that could be applied to future operations. Preliminary assessment shows complete mission success, Webb announced. All hostages recovered alive, enemy command structure eliminated, defensive installations destroyed, 0 friendly casualties. She looked directly at Maeve. Chief Sinclair, what you accomplished tonight will be studied in classified briefings for decades to come. The praise felt hollow as spent brass. Maeve had flown this mission not for glory or recognition, but for the simple mathematical certainty that American lives were worth any risk she could survive. The hostages were safe. That was all that mattered. Everything else was just noise. Ma'am, there's something else, Webb continued, her expression growing serious. Intelligence indicates this operation has attracted attention from certain parties who'd prefer that Reaper 6 remain officially dead. There may be complications regarding your return to civilian life. Complications. Military speak for death squads and assassination, attempts by people who understood that legends could become inconvenient when they refused to stay buried. Maeve had expected this. Her resurrection for Operation Silent Thunder had been witnessed by too many people to remain secret for long. I understand, Colonel. What are my options? Webb spread a collection of documents across the table. New identities, relocation packages, assignments to forward operating bases, where officially dead pilots could continue serving their country without existing in any public record. Each option represented a different kind of death, the slow dissolution of Maeve Sinclair into whatever the mission required her to become. There's also this, Webb said, placing a single sheet of paper on top of the others. It bore the letterhead of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment and the signature of someone with enough stars to authorize miracles. Maeve read the orders twice before their meaning sank in. Chief Warrant Officer Maeve Sinclair is hereby reinstated to active duty with full honors and assigned as Senior Instructor Pilot, Advanced Tactics Development Program. Duty Station, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Security clearance, compartmentalized special access required. They want me to train the next generation, she said, understanding the implications immediately. The Army had decided that Reaper 6's skills were too valuable to waste on a single pilot. They wanted her to create more legends, to pass on the techniques and instincts that had made her irreplaceable. The program doesn't officially exist, Webb explained. You'd be training pilots for missions that will never appear in any history book. Deep black operations, hostage rescues, surgical strikes in places where conventional forces can't operate. It's dangerous work, but it's also necessary work. Maeve thought about Cedar Falls, Montana, where her coffee pot was probably still warm and her apron still lay folded on the counter. That life had been comfortable, safe, normal in ways she'd forgotten were possible. But it had also been empty, a hollow shell of existence that had left her feeling like she was slowly suffocating. This offer represented something else entirely: purpose. The chance to ensure that future hostages would have someone willing and able to fly into hell itself for the chance to bring them home. The opportunity to create warriors who could thread needles in the dark while carrying precious cargo through hostile airspace. When do I start? She asked. Webb's smile was sharp as winter sunrise. Your transport to Fort Campbell leaves in 6 hours. Welcome back to the war, Reaper 6. The flight to Kentucky passed in comfortable solitude, giving Maeve time to process the transformation she'd undergone in less than 48 hours. She'd gone from small-town waitress to legend, reborn to instructor of legends, each role requiring different skills, but the same fundamental willingness to risk everything for strangers in uniform. Emma's letter was still in her pocket, the paper soft from countless readings over the past 18 months. Fly safe, Mom. Come home to me. She'd finally found a way to honor both parts of that request, flying safely enough to survive the missions that others couldn't, while coming home to the family of warriors who understood that some things were worth dying for. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's compound at Fort Campbell looked like any other military facility from the outside: barracks, hangars, training facilities arranged with geometric precision. But Maeve knew better. This was where America's most elite helicopter pilots learned to do things that physics said were impossible, where the line between heroism and suicide was measured in inches and milliseconds. Her new quarters were spartanly furnished but comfortable, a single room that would serve as home base between training missions and classified operations. The walls were bare except for a single photograph: Emma Sinclair in her high school graduation gown, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed the future held infinite possibilities. That evening, she met her first class of students, 12 pilots selected from across the military for skills that went beyond technical competence into the realm of instinctive understanding. They looked at her with the mixture of respect and skepticism that legends always attracted, wondering if the stories were true or just military mythology. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak. "My name is Chief Warrant Officer Maeve Sinclair. You may have heard stories about someone called Reaper 6. For the purposes of this program, those stories never happened. What will happen is that you will learn to fly helicopters in ways that will save American lives in places where conventional tactics fail." Over the following months, she would teach them the dance of death from above, how to thread mountains in zero visibility, how to deliver precision fire while under attack from multiple directions, how to extract wounded warriors from landing zones that existed only in the minds of desperate ground commanders. She would pass on the techniques that had made her legend, ensuring that future hostages would have warriors capable of the impossible coming to their rescue. But tonight, as she sat in her quarters and read Emma's letter one more time, Maeve Sinclair allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd found her way home, not to Cedar Falls, Montana, but to the place where she truly belonged, preparing the next generation of pilots to be guardians of the innocent and instruments of American will in the dark corners of the world. The war would always need its reapers. Now it would have more than one. 6 months into her assignment at Fort Campbell, Maeve stood in Hangar 7 watching 12 of America's finest pilots attempt a training exercise that should have been routine. Instead, she was witnessing a masterclass in how good pilots could become dead pilots through overconfidence and insufficient respect for the aircraft they flew. Captain Sarah Chen brought her Black Hawk in too fast, too steep, trying to impress the legendary Reaper 6 with aggressive flying that demonstrated technical skill but tactical stupidity. The landing was hard enough to stress the airframe, the kind of mistake that got people killed in combat zones where mechanical failure meant capture or death. "Captain Chen," Maeve's voice carried across the hangar with the quiet authority that made hardened warriors straighten unconsciously. "What did you just teach the enemy about your capabilities?" Chen's confusion was evident. "Ma'am, your landing approach was visible from 12 miles away. You've announced your position, your payload capacity, and your pilot's ego problems to anyone with binoculars and a radio. In a combat zone, that aircraft would be smoking wreckage, and you'd be explaining your tactical decisions to whoever found your crash site first." The lesson was harsh but necessary. These pilots had been selected for advanced training because they were already exceptional, the top 1% of military aviators who'd proven themselves in combat operations around the world. But exceptional wasn't good enough for the missions they were being prepared to fly. They needed to transcend human limitations, to become something more than pilots. They needed to become instruments of precisely controlled lethality. "Flight operations are suspended," Maeve announced. "We're moving to classroom instruction." The classroom was another windowless trailer, this one equipped with projection systems and tactical displays that could simulate combat scenarios with brutal realism. Maeve had spent weeks preparing this particular lesson, drawing on classified after-action reports from operations that officially never happened. "Gentlemen and lady," she began, nodding to the single female pilot in the class, "you've been selected for this program because someone believes you have the potential to become something more than exceptional pilots. Today we discuss what that means." The first slide showed satellite imagery of a compound in Syria, smoking ruins surrounded by scattered debris that had once been sophisticated air defense systems. The pilots studied the destruction with professional interest, noting the precision of the strikes and the tactical implications of the damage patterns. "Operation Silent Thunder," Maeve continued, involved the rescue of 67 American hostages from a facility designed specifically to prevent helicopter-borne rescue operations. The enemy had studied American tactics, analyzed previous operations, and constructed defenses that should have made success impossible. She clicked to the next slide. Technical specifications for the compound's air defense network. Surface-to-air missiles, radar-guided anti-aircraft guns, electronic warfare systems that could blind aircraft sensors and disrupt communications. It was a fortress built by minds that understood how modern warfare worked and had prepared accordingly. Conventional tactics would have resulted in heavy casualties and probable mission failure. Instead, a single pilot in a modified Little Bird neutralized all defensive positions, delivered 12 SEALs to multiple insertion points, provided close air support during the assault, and extracted all personnel without friendly casualties. The silence in the trailer was absolute. These pilots understood aircraft capabilities and tactical limitations. What Maeve was describing should have been impossible for a single crew to accomplish. How? The question came from Major James Morrison, a Marine pilot with 3 combat tours and a reputation for tactical innovation. The mathematics don't work. One aircraft can't provide that level of combat power while maintaining precision necessary for hostage rescue. Maeve's smile was cold as mountain air. Major Morrison, you're thinking like a pilot. The mission required someone who could become something more than that, someone who could merge completely with their aircraft to create a weapon system that transcended individual human limitations. She clicked to the next slide. Gun camera footage from Operation Silent Thunder, showing precision strikes that threaded between buildings and eliminated targets with surgical accuracy. The pilots watched in fascination as defensive positions simply evaporated under assault that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. This is what you're here to learn, Maeve continued. Not just how to fly helicopters, but how to become part of them. How to extend your senses through sensors and weapon systems until the distinction between pilot and aircraft disappears. How to think in 3 dimensions while calculating angles of attack, fuel consumption, and collateral damage simultaneously. The footage continued. Aerial maneuvers that defied physics, firing solutions that required computational abilities beyond normal human capacity, split-second decisions that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Each sequence demonstrated skills that went beyond training into the realm of instinctive understanding. The pilot who flew this mission had 15 years of experience in special operations aviation, Maeve explained. She'd flown in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and half a dozen other places that don't appear on official maps. She'd learned to do things in aircraft that manufacturers said were impossible, because the alternative was leaving Americans behind enemy lines. Captain Chen raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, the pilot, is she available for consultation? Could we study her techniques directly?" Maeve's expression didn't change. The pilot was officially killed in action 18 months ago. For the purposes of this briefing, she never existed. However, her techniques have been analyzed and incorporated into this training program. You'll learn everything she knew, because the missions you'll fly will require nothing less than perfect execution. Over the following hours, she walked them through every aspect of Operation Silent Thunder: the intelligence preparation, the tactical planning, the split-second decisions that had turned an impossible rescue into American victory. Each detail was dissected, analyzed, and incorporated into training scenarios that would push these pilots beyond their current limitations. When the briefing ended, the 12 pilots filed out in contemplative silence, each one understanding that they'd been given a glimpse into capabilities they'd never imagined possible. They would spend the next 6 months learning to replicate those capabilities, pushing themselves and their aircraft to levels of performance that would either forge them into legends or kill them in the attempt. As the trailer emptied, Maeve remained seated, staring at the final slide, a photograph of 67 Americans walking toward extraction helicopters, alive because someone had been willing to risk everything for strangers in distress. This was why she taught, not for the thrill of passing on tactical knowledge, but for the mathematical certainty that her students would save lives in places where conventional rescue was impossible. The next generation of Reapers was taking shape. The advanced flight training began before dawn, when darkness still shrouded Fort Campbell, and the only sounds were the whisper of rotor blades and the mechanical precision of aircraft systems coming online. Maeve stood on the flight line, watching her students conduct pre-flight inspections with the methodical thoroughness she drilled into them over the past 3 months. Each check was performed exactly as specified, because in their line of work, mechanical failure wasn't just dangerous. It was a betrayal of the Americans who would depend on their aircraft for survival. Captain Sarah Chen had evolved significantly since that first disastrous landing demonstration. Her pre-flight inspection was now a study in professional competence, each system check performed with the understanding that lives would depend on every bolt, wire, and fluid level functioning perfectly under combat stress. The cocky pilot who tried to impress her instructor with unnecessary risks had been replaced by someone who understood that true skill lay in making the impossible look routine. "Chen, you're primary on today's exercise," Maeve announced, watching the pilot's reaction carefully. Leadership under pressure was one of the skills they'd need, the ability to make tactical decisions while flying aircraft at the limits of performance while other lives hung in the balance. The training scenario was designed to be difficult, a simulated hostage rescue in mountainous terrain, with multiple landing zones, electronic countermeasures, and simulated surface-to-air missile threats. Success required not just individual skill but perfect coordination between aircraft, ground teams, and supporting elements. Major Morrison would be flying Overwatch in a modified Apache, providing suppressive fire and electronic warfare support. The other 10 pilots would be scattered across various support roles: insertion, extraction, medical evacuation, and logistics. Each position required different skills but the same fundamental understanding. They were part of something larger than themselves, links in a chain that could save or doom the Americans they'd sworn to protect. "Weather conditions are marginal," the briefing officer announced. "Cloud ceiling at 200 feet, visibility less than a mile, winds gusting to 30 knots. Real-world operations would be suspended under these conditions." Maeve's smile was sharp as a blade. Real-world hostages don't get to choose their weather. If Americans are in danger, we fly regardless of conditions. The mission doesn't change because the sky isn't cooperating. The first phase of the exercise went smoothly. Insertion of ground teams via fast rope into simulated enemy territory, with Chen demonstrating the precise aircraft control necessary to hold position, while operators descended into darkness and uncertainty. Her little bird hovered with mechanical steadiness, each micro-adjustment calculated to maintain stability despite wind conditions that should have made precision flying impossible. But as they transitioned to the rescue phase, everything began deteriorating rapidly. Simulated missile launches lit up threat warning systems, electronic countermeasures scrambled communications, and the weather continued deteriorating toward conditions that would ground conventional aircraft. This was where training separated good pilots from dead pilots. The moment when multiple systems failures combined with environmental hazards to create scenarios where survival required more than technical knowledge. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Vanguard 2, Morrison's voice crackled through static-filled communications. "Simulated engine failure, attempting emergency landing. I'm going down in Sector 7. The scenario was scripted, but the skills required to respond were entirely real. Chen had to make immediate tactical decisions, continue with the primary mission or divert resources to assist a fellow pilot in distress. In combat, these choices carried consequences that went far beyond training scores. They determined who lived, who died, and who came home to families that would never understand the prices paid for their freedom. Vanguard elements, this is Vanguard 1. Chen's voice carried new authority as she assumed mission command. Vanguard 3 and 4 proceed to Sector 7 for emergency extraction. All other elements continue with primary mission. We don't leave anyone behind. The decision was tactically sound and morally necessary. Exactly what Maeve hoped to hear from pilots who understood that their ultimate mission was bringing Americans home alive. But executing the decision required skills that pushed aircraft and crews to their absolute limits. Chen threaded her little bird through mountain terrain that existed primarily as radar shadows and GPS coordinates, using night vision systems to navigate through clouds that reduced visibility to mere feet. Behind her, the extraction teams flew formation through conditions that should have scattered them across several mountain ranges, holding position through instrument flying that required complete trust in equipment and training. Vanguard 2 located, came the report. Pilot and crew are secure, ready for extraction. The emergency pickup required precision that bordered on supernatural, landing in a space barely larger than the aircraft itself, while maintaining enough power to lift off immediately if ground conditions deteriorated. Chen accomplished the maneuver with the casual competence of someone who'd learned to treat impossible as merely Tuesday. As they returned to base, Maeve reflected on what she'd witnessed. These 12 pilots had arrived as exceptional individuals, the top of their profession, selected for skills and capabilities that put them among the military's elite. But over the past 6 months, they'd become something more. A team capable of executing missions that would have been impossible for any of them individually. The debriefing took place in the same classroom where they'd studied Operation Silent Thunder, but now the atmosphere was different. These weren't students anymore. They were warriors ready for missions that would never appear in official records, but would determine whether Americans in distant places lived or died. Overall assessment, Maeve announced, is that you've demonstrated capabilities consistent with special operations requirements. You've learned to fly as extensions of your aircraft, to think tactically while executing technically demanding maneuvers, and to make decisions under pressure that prioritize mission success and personnel safety. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. In the special operations community, such assessments were professional certifications that lives could be trusted to these people's skills and judgment. "What's next for us, Chief?" Chen asked, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who discovered capabilities she'd never suspected she possessed. Maeve's smile was enigmatic. "What's next is that you forget this training program ever happened. You return to your units with no official record of your time here, no documentation of the skills you've acquired, and no indication that you've been prepared for missions that don't officially exist. But when the call comes, and it will come, you'll be ready to do what others cannot." The invisible war needed invisible warriors. America's enemies would never know that 12 ordinary pilots had learned to become something extraordinary, that conventional forces had been quietly augmented by operators capable of the impossible. The legend of Reaper 6 would live on in the skills she'd passed to others, ensuring that future hostages would have guardians willing and able to fly through hell itself for the chance to bring them home. The next generation of legends was ready for war. As autumn painted the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and crimson, Maeve received the call she'd been expecting and dreading for the past 8 months. The secure phone in her quarters buzzed with the particular urgency that preceded missions where American lives hung in the balance and conventional solutions had already failed. "Reaper 6, this is Phoenix Actual," came the familiar voice of Colonel Webb. "We have a situation developing in Eastern Europe. 62 American diplomats and security personnel have been taken hostage during a peace negotiation in Romania. Enemy forces are well-trained, well-equipped, and specifically requested that no rescue be attempted." The mathematics were brutally clear. Trained hostage-takers who knew enough to fear American special operations capabilities, diplomatic personnel whose capture represented a significant intelligence coup for hostile nations, and a request for no rescue that could only mean they understood exactly who might be sent to recover the hostages. Request assessment and recommendations, Webb continued. Timeline for action is 72 hours maximum. After that, political considerations will prevent military response. Maeve studied the intelligence files with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that small details could mean the difference between mission success and national humiliation. The hostages were being held in a former Soviet research facility, underground bunkers connected by tunnels that could withstand nuclear attack, surrounded by terrain that offered no cover for approaching forces. Worse, the enemy had learned from Syria. Intelligence indicated surface-to-air missile systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and coordinated defensive positions that had been designed specifically to counter helicopter-borne rescue operations. They'd studied Operation Silent Thunder and prepared countermeasures that should make a successful rescue impossible. Should make it impossible. But Maeve had built a career on proving that impossible was just another tactical challenge requiring unconventional solutions. Phoenix Actual, this is Reaper 6, she transmitted after reviewing the files. Mission is feasible with specialized personnel and modified equipment. Recommend deployment of assets from Advanced Tactics Development Program. There was a pause that stretched across encrypted channels like a held breath. Reaper 6, those personnel are not yet certified for independent operations. Their training is incomplete. Their training is complete enough for this mission, Maeve replied, thinking of Chen's precision flying through mountain terrain, Morrison's tactical decision-making under pressure, and the 10 other pilots who'd learned to transcend individual limitations to become something more than the sum of their parts. Understood. You are authorized to deploy with selected personnel from ATDP. Mission designation is Operation Iron Thunder. Aircraft and equipment are being staged at Ramstein Air Base. You have 48 hours to mission execution. 48 hours to prepare for a rescue operation that would either validate 6 months of intensive training or result in the deaths of America's most promising special operations pilots. The mathematics of war were always brutal, but they became personal when you trained the warriors being asked to risk everything for strangers in uniform. Maeve walked across the compound to the instructor's briefing room.